What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Should I not do that cheesy intro? Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Anyways, welcome back to the channel. So as I mentioned in my last video, I'm back. And just for reference, I'm recording on a Lumix GH7 on a Lumix Leica 12-60 f2.4 and autofocus and vlog. And so we'll talk about this in a future video. But anyways, today I want to talk about this. So, the main camera that I use these days for now is this Fuji X-T5 that you see right here. Yes, I know the body cap is off and it's probably people freaking out about dust on your sensor. It's okay, not a big deal. Anyways, when you first purchase this camera, if you buy it in the kit, one of the options is this bad boy right here. This is the 16-80 f4 constant lens. Now, the thing about this lens is that it's f4 constant, so it's not like a bokeh monster. It's a little bit bigger, but it does have an aperture ring, and it zooms out, and it goes from 16-80, which is a 24 to 120 equivalent. And so if you're going on like a vacation and you're doing a lot of like landscape type stuff, this is really a great option. But if you want something more, that's, well, more in terms of image quality, sharpness, and is what is supposed to be Fuji's best of the best, you would inevitably opt for this bad boy right here, which is the 16-55 f2.8. And the reason why I compared the 16-80 to this is that when you look at them, they're pretty close to the same. They're not quite the same. The 16-80 is a little bit bigger, but yeah, just like lens on lens, they're pretty much the same. Now, obviously the big difference here is that this one goes from 16-80, but you give up the aperture at f4. This one's 16-55, which is more like a 24 to, I don't know, 82, something like that. Maybe my math is wrong. Anyways, we'll call it 24 to 70 for the sake of making this conversation easy. Right, but you get 2.8 all the way. And this lens is, I guess, technically Fuji's Pro Red Badge. You guys see this right here, Red Badge lens. That is their best. And so this is their best image quality. And in the conversation I was having about this lens to some friends of mine was that, hey, it's not really that big and heavy. In fact, the 16-80 feels heavier. And I'm guessing it is. Like this version 2 that I have here is lighter definitely than the version 1. And I was telling them, like, hey, I really think that this lens is like basically a bag of 2.8 primes, if you want to consider it that. Now, the reason why that's relevant to today's video is that I also happen to have a couple of the crons, the 35mm f2 Fuji cron right here, and then I have the 50mm f2 Fuji cron as well. And comparably, these lenses are significantly smaller when you put them on there. Of course, you get the advantage of f2 versus this as being an f2.8 as the maximum aperture, but you're also stuck at one focal length. So if I was to go on vacation, like I am here in a couple of weeks, I have to bring multiple lenses. Just for comparison, the 35 f2 is even smaller, right? And so it changes the footprint of the camera quite a bit. I'll tell you that, like, from a user perspective, this on the Fuji X-T5 feels way more appealing to me than something like the big zoom lens, just because it's such a small footprint. And I think this is really quite an interesting setup here. But nonetheless, to prove out my theory on whether or not the 16-55 is truly, really a bag of primes, I was challenged and asked to compare the 35 f2 cron and the 50 f2 cron against the 16-55. And I would argue the crons are actually very sharp lenses. Maybe they don't have the same depth of field or character as some of the older 1.4 lenses, but I do believe they're sharper than the original 1.4 lenses. And the new 33 1.4 and 56 1.2, they might have a hair in terms of overall image quality, but they're also much bigger as well. And so I don't think that we should really compare those in terms of the zoom versus those new primes, because those are 1.4 and they're also big, and so you lose like that size advantage. So I was curious, would I rather on vacation carry something like this, which is a much smaller footprint, and just have this like in my pocket or whatever? I have a backpack usually with me of some sort. Or is it better to like just carry an f4 lens, right, and rock something like this to get the reach, even though I give it the aperture, or this? Now, in this video, I'm not going to talk about the 16-80 image quality, but I do want to show you a few pictures as we speak right now, comparing the 35 f2 and the 50 f2 to the 16-55. So let's just get into it. I know I did a lot of talking on this. I want to show you guys a few pictures, and I'm going to come back with my thoughts in just a second. now that you had a chance to look at those pictures, I'm curious what your overall thought is on those images, but I'll give you mine because sometimes YouTube algorithm and compression doesn't really show you. I will tell you this. The 16 to 55 is every bit as sharp as the primes at 2.8. So at its most wide open aperture, at the respective same focal length, so 35 and 50 on the lens, I felt that the 2.8 prime lens was just as sharp as the f2 lens. The only little exception there is I felt the 50 f2 was maybe a hair sharper than the zoom lens, but I don't know if that's significant enough to make a difference versus the versatility you get out of that zoom lens. Again, as I mentioned earlier, you also have to think about the 50 f2 as a much smaller lens than the 16 to 55, so there's that trade-off there. Same with the 35 f2. I actually felt like the 35 f2 Fujicron at 2.8 was not nearly, or I thought the zoom might have been a little bit sharper, right? Maybe that's my copy of the lens. I don't know, but again, both of them were incredibly sharp, in my opinion. And then when you stop down to, I think it was the f5.6 of this video, I thought all the lenses are really, really good. The one thing I did notice is that in terms of overall contrast and color rendition, I do think that Fuji has done something different on the 16 to 55. It's just a little bit difference in the contrast, and I would say that was more noticeable in the 35mm focal length comparing to the 35 f2 than it was in the 50mm f2. For some reason, I feel like the 35 and the 50 crons have a little bit difference in terms of their contrast output, but again, nothing very significant. You just have to maybe slightly bump the slider or whatever if you're doing any editing, or if you're a JPEG person, like those are all straight out of camera JPEGs, then you know it's probably just a slight bump maybe on your iPhone or something like that if you do something in terms of overall editing there. But again, I would say negligible. And my point here is that the 16 to 55, I really do believe overall is a bag of 2.8 primes from 16 to 55. It's awesome. So if you don't need to go down f2 or f1.8 or 1.4, then it's really, really great from that perspective. The sharpness is top notch. It's weather sealed. You got the versatility there. The only big trade-off is whether you want to carry around a bigger lens versus something like the smaller primes. Or are you some kind of person that maybe thrives under having the constraints of a prime versus the benefits of a zoom? So that's really it. And I would tell you, if you're thinking about going a bunch of primes or the zoom, you really only have to consider the size and the versatility. Or the aperture, I'd say, actually. Versatility and aperture. Like, do you want to go get the 1.4 primes? Well, you're not going to gain size then, but you are going to gain the aperture and the blurry background and that depth of field control. So maybe that's worth it to you. If you want to gain size, then you got to go with the crons, right? But I would say image quality on the 16 to 55 is second to none. It's really, really good lens, and I think it's probably one of the best purchases I've ever made for Fuji. Oh, by the way, in case you guys are smashing the keyboards right now, the settings for the testing, I did all AFS, so single point autofocus on a tripod with a 2-second timer delay. I set the ISO aperture all manually, so it wasn't over auto exposure changing. And the only thing I did was change the shutter speed to make sure I had the right exposure for all of them. And so the f2.8 shots were all shot at the same shutter speed. The f5.6 shots were at the same shutter speed. And so as far as I'm concerned, is about as consistent as you can get in terms of those comparisons. Anyways, guys, just want to share this to you. If you're a Fuji shooter and you're wondering, do I get like the one good $1,000 zoom or do I buy a bag of primes? You really just have to think about, do I want the versatility and willing to do it the bigger size? It's not huge. The version 2 of the 16-55 is much smaller than the version 1. Or would I rather carry a couple primes and limit myself and shoot that way and gain some of the benefits of having the smaller compact size? That's really what it comes down to. That's it. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it. If you have questions, comments below, ask them. I'll try to respond to them. And also, how did the video look on this GH7? See you in the next one.